Vulnerability. It's probably one of the biggest misconceptions because it's something that all of us are really walking around somewhat fearing being vulnerable. And in a sense, maybe rightfully so, because the word itself indicates weakness, indicates being open to being attacked, damaged, hurted, wounded. We're taught that men shouldn't be vulnerable because, again, it indicates weakness. And so as a guy, you shouldn't be weak, you shouldn't be vulnerable. You shouldn't be damaged easily, you should be strong. And so we think that vulnerability is the opposite of somewhat being strong in a sense. And maybe rightfully so that we have all these negative things tied up with it, because what we feel vulnerable about is really the stuff that we're ashamed of, that we are feeling guilty of, and that we are fearing. And so vulnerability is something that we don't feel like tapping into, because if we would, it would mean revealing those things that we feel guilty and shameful and fearful of. And so because we have all these feelings of fear, shame and guilt, we are very, very afraid of showing the sides of us or the things or whatever it is that has brought those feelings into us. We're very afraid of showing what we're fearful of, showing what we're afraid of, ashamed of, and showing what we feel guilty about, because we are very scared of being judged by others, because if we would be judged by others, it would mean that we wouldn't be good enough, or we wouldn't be loved. And maybe the biggest part of it is that we are afraid that we'll be judged by ourselves, really, and that because a lot of the time what we're really doing, instead of being vulnerable, we're trying to be perfect. We're trying to pretend that we are this beautiful creation with this flawless skin, this perfect hair, this body, and we're trying to pretend that all we're doing, everything we're doing is perfect, because of course we're walking around thinking that we need to be a certain way for others to accept us, and probably as well even more so for us to accept ourselves. But here's the paradox, or the irony in it all, that when we're walking around pretending that we're perfect, or walking around not willing to be vulnerable, not willing to really show our true self with all the flaws and all the mistakes and failures that we are and that we have, we're in a sense very much not accepting ourselves, and we're judging ourselves. And so what it really leads to, pretending that we're perfect, is it leads to us not liking ourselves, us not loving ourselves, because we're in a sense rejecting all the parts of ourselves that aren't perfect. And so the truth behind vulnerability and why it's so powerful is that in vulnerability we get to step into that place where we're honoring ourselves and honoring what we truly are, and showing all of it, all the dirt, all the secrets, all the nasty stuff that we're trying to pretend is not there, but obviously is there, because we're all human beings, we're all flawed. And so what vulnerability is really about, it's about openness, honesty, expression of our true selves, being authentic and not hiding. And so while it's true that it is indicating that you're open for attack and you're easily being wounded, because you're showing your true self, you're showing yourself in all the beauty of that which you are, and because all the nasty stuff is beautiful as well, because you're perfect the way you are, and so you don't need to hide all those things. You don't need to pretend that you're perfect, and in that way reject yourself. And so the first step to vulnerability is really understanding, really profoundly understanding that you're perfect the way you are, with all your flaws, with all your mistakes, with all the dirty stuff that you think are making you not good enough. With all of it, you're already perfect. So first is understanding that, and when you do that, it's so much easier being vulnerable, because you're not afraid of not being perfect, because you know that even though you are flawed, you're still perfect and complete and amazing the way you are. And so the first step is really profoundly understanding that, and not just being on a logical level like, oh yeah, that makes sense, but really feeling that in your gut, feeling that you are good enough even with all your flaws, and accepting yourself with all your flaws. And when you're doing that, it's so much easier being vulnerable, because now you don't have to be afraid that people will judge you as not good enough, or will think less of you, because you already know that you are good enough. Now here's the real kicker behind it, because we're all walking around afraid that people will mock us, laugh at us, reject us, or whatever when we show our true self. But the beauty and the real astonishing thing about vulnerability is that when you step into it, you take away the power behind the rejection of the people. And here's why. Because when you embrace yourself and you open up and you show your authentic fullness of your beautiful being to the world, and you're willing to be flawed, and you're willing to not be perfect, and you're willing to admit the stuff that you are ashamed and guilty and fearful of, you'll start accepting yourself on a much deeper level. And so what you really are building by being vulnerable is you're building the foundation of your self-worth, the foundation of your confidence, because you're accepting yourself. And so when you're walking around trying to be perfect, you're really rejecting yourself. And so you're really communicating to yourself that you aren't good enough to show your authentic self. And so when you're willing to step into vulnerability, not only are you being authentic to people, which is a crazy benefit in itself, but you're accepting and embracing yourself and loving yourself. And so you have a much deeper understanding and love and connection with who you really are. And so if people will reject you, if people will hate you and mock you and make fun of you and embarrass you, it doesn't matter as much, because you're already loving yourself. And so even in that situation, you'll be a lot stronger than you were before when you weren't willing to be vulnerable, because now you're actually loving yourself. And so that's the real kicker behind vulnerability. That's why it's so fucking powerful, because you'll love yourself even more and you'll take away the power of the rejection from other people. I hope that you got something out of this video, and if you did, make sure to let me know. Comment and like the video, and share your thoughts. When was the last time that you were being vulnerable and truly embracing who you are? Finally, if you like the video, make sure to subscribe, because I have another video coming up in this I have another video coming up on this subject about vulnerability, and why it's so fucking powerful for all of your relationships, and why it's the #1 thing that you need to embrace and step into if you want to have amazing connected relationships, both with friends, family, as well as with loved ones, or in a romantic sense. So make sure to subscribe and stay tuned, because that video is coming out. Thank you for watching.